TikTok US History Summer School, let's do it, it's a thing. So let's start this course where all US history courses really should start, by talking about the indigenous people of the Americas before white people showed up. What a thought. I just want to debunk 3 big myths about what the Americas were like before the Columbian era. The most important thing to understand about all of our concepts, and by our I mean like white historians, all of our concepts about the Americas before white people showed up, is that all of our accounts are still based on observations after a demographic collapse. So the way that that disease works, right? If Columbus shows up in 1492 and a lot of other conquistadors are there, like the disease is going to go way ahead of the people. So even before white people arrive in parts of the continent, diseases like smallpox and measles have already reached those places. So even with first contact, right? The first accounts of like an explorer or a white settler or whatever encountering indigenous Americans, that's not the first contact. They are seeing that group of people after the population has been decimated by disease. Most experts estimate there are around 50 million people living in the Americas before white people showed up. And what that means is that around 88% of the population of those 2 continents died. In fact, the first 50 like white settlements in New England were built on previously existing indigenous settlements. The white people were just like, wow, this is convenient. All the indigenous people just left. No, they died. You were building on graveyards. Myth number 2 was that white Europeans were like inherently superior to indigenous people. We talk about guns, germs, and steel. No, it's just germs. Germs, like disease was the thing that allowed white Europeans to so quickly conquer the American continents. I mean, even John Smith admitted that their guns were useless compared to the bows and arrows of the indigenous people, right? Charles C. Mann is an expert on this. He wrote a book called 1491, and he interviewed 7 experts on this time period, and he asked all 7 of them, would you rather live as a Native American or European in 1491? 7 out of 7 said the Native Americans. Like hands down, right? The Native Americans commented on how gross and dirty the Europeans were. They were like looking at handkerchiefs going like, that's disgusting and totally unsanitary, right? Like they just could not figure out. They also were asking questions like, well, if your civilization is so great, why are you all leaving? The last myth I want to talk about is what I sometimes call the paint with all the colors of the wind myth. This idea that like North America especially was this vast, untouched, pristine wilderness. No. The indigenous people like practiced thousands of years of environmental engineering and a lot of hard work to create a sustainable utopia. Yes, you had these like herds of buffalo that were just roaming by. That was on purpose. The indigenous people would plant trees. They would burn down certain parts of the environment so that the bison or the buffalo would like have to go by their camp so that they were right there. Like they engineered the environment to serve their needs, but also be sustainable. So follow for part 2 when white people show up and ruin it. Hey, great question. I've been getting this question a lot. So what I meant in my video was that like the first, Europeans arrive in 1492 and then the next few decades, and they mostly stay on the coast for the most part. And they have contact with Native Americans directly. And those Native Americans, a lot of them die of disease and also guns and stuff. But that also the disease spreads faster than the Europeans do through the Americas. And so, for example, you have intertribal trade, warfare. You have domesticated animals like pigs and horses and whatever, and mosquitoes like carrying the disease. So the point is that by the time a lot more British settlers start arriving in the 1600s, it's been over 100 years where the disease has already ravaged the continent. So even though they're showing up sort of for the first time and seeing this as their first contact, what they're seeing is the aftermath of that demographic collapse. Okay, see y'all tomorrow for part 2 of summer school. Hey, let's talk about Roanoke. And I don't even mean the Roanoke you think I mean. There was one that was even earlier. In 1585, there was 100 people that founded a tiny little colony on Roanoke Island outside modern-day North Carolina, and included a team of scientists. This included a Jewish scientist from Prague and also an astronomer who completed an accurate drawing of the moon using a telescope, and he did it 4 months before Galileo did it. Hey. They set up a little science lab and start doing experiments and trying to figure out about the environment, but then they keep getting attacked by Native Americans, so they're like, yeah, we're out. Then 2 years later is when the Roanoke colony that you have heard of gets settled. The governor goes back to England, he gets caught up in a war with France and has to fight for England, and so he doesn't return to the colony until 3 years later. When he comes back, everyone's gone, everything's disappeared, there's just the word Croatoan carved on like a wooden signpost. And within the last 2 years, archaeologists think they figured out what happened to them. They went to live with the Croatoan tribe. They found shards of English pottery amongst different camps. They assimilated and survived.